likes best, fighting crime in the streets.
Ah, Walter. Fancy meeting you here.
Very fancy indeed, Otto.
He glowed in the dark, drove a car that made right angles at 90 miles an hour, and disappeared every time someone turned on a toaster. He was Automan, the holographic super cop nobody asked for, and everyone secretly loved. The show lasted one season, cost a fortune, and nearly broke the man inside the suit. The creator stole from himself. The network threw it into a scheduling death trap, and the little floating cursor who built everything. He almost got his own spin-off. These are 20 weird facts about Automan, 1983's most expensive, most dazzling, most gloriously doomed science fiction TV experiment. And tucked inside the chaos, a son of Hollywood royalty sitting in a computer room, pretending to type code he absolutely did not understand. Hi, my name is Mark, and this is Old Sci-Fi Movies. Strap in. This one flickers. Number 1. Before Automan ever lit up a television screen, he lived inside the mind of one man who had already built half of science fiction television with his bare hands. Glenn A. Larson was the architect. If you watched anything with lasers and synthesizers on American TV in the late 70s and early 80s, Larson probably made it. Battlestar Galactica, Engd, Buck Rogers in the 25th century, Ekmistas, Knight Rider, Magnum P.I. The man was a factory, a very loud, very flashy, very profitable factory. And by 1983, Larson had a new obsession: computers. Everyone did. The home computing revolution was exploding. Arcades were packed wall to wall, and a little Disney film called Tron had just blown people's minds with its glowing grid world and digital warriors. Larson watched Tron and thought, what if that, but weekly? What if a computer program could step out of the machine and walk around Los Angeles fighting crime in a suit that looked like a disco ball designed by NASA? He pitched it to ABC, and ABC, bless their hearts, said yes without fully understanding what they were agreeing to. Glenn Larson had done it again. He had sold a fever dream and called it primetime. Number 2. Here is something Hollywood insiders knew, but nobody talked about loudly. Glenn Larson had a nickname in the industry, and it was not a compliment. They called him Glenn A. Larceny, because Larson had a habit, a very consistent, very well-documented habit, of borrowing heavily from his own previous work. Knight Rider was basically a rehash of his earlier show Alias Smith & Jones, just with a car instead of cowboys. Battlestar Galactica had DNA from his unproduced Star Wars spec ideas. And Automan was Tron meets Knight Rider, filtered through a police procedural, wearing a shiny suit. The glowing vehicle that made impossible turns was a direct visual echo of the light cycles from Tron. The computer-generated hero, who lived inside a machine, was Tron's main character, moved to television. Even the dynamic of the brilliant but overlooked tech guy, partnered with an impossibly capable superhero partner, was identical to the Kit and Michael Knight setup from Knight Rider, which Larson had launched just 1 year earlier. Nobody sued, nobody screamed plagiarism. They just shook their heads, cashed their checks, and watched the ratings. Larson didn't steal from others. He stole from himself, constantly, enthusiastically, without apology. Number 3. The man chosen to become Automan was not a household name, but he carried one of the most famous bloodlines in entertainment history, just not his own. DC Arnaz Jr., cast as Walter Nebusher, the nerdy LAPD computer programmer who accidentally creates a living hologram, was the son of Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. Let that land for a second. The kid grew up on the set of I Love Lucy. His parents were arguably the most famous couple in American television history. His mother invented the modern sitcom format. His father pioneered the 3-camera studio shoot. And here he was, sitting in a darkened computer lab in 1983, frantically typing on a keyboard, pretending to understand lines of code that the technical consultant had to write phonetically on a card just off camera so he could sound convincing. Arnaz was charming in the role. Warm, likable, slightly hapless in exactly the right way. But the shadow of his parents followed him everywhere on set. Cast members recalled moments where visitors would arrive, expecting Lucille Ball's son to be funnier, louder, redder. He was none of those things. He was quietly doing his job in a room full of blinking prop computers and trusting the guy in the glowing suit to carry the show. Number 4. Chuck Wagner was the man inside the suit, and the suit, let me tell you, was not a gift. The Automan costume was a masterpiece of late-night engineering panic, designed to photograph as a glowing, computer-generated entity, even though nothing about the production was computer-generated, not one pixel. The glowing effect was achieved through a combination of highly reflective Scotchlite material, the same stuff used on highway road signs, ultraviolet lighting rigs, and post-production optical enhancement that took the effects team days to complete per episode. The suit was stiff. The suit was hot. The suit caught on absolutely everything it touched. Wagner described walking through a doorway as a mission. He could not sit naturally. He could not bend in certain directions without risking the reflective panels cracking or peeling. Between takes, he needed handlers just to keep the costume from falling apart on camera. On hot shooting days in Los Angeles, the heat inside the suit became genuinely uncomfortable. He sweat through takes. He endured the lights. He stood perfectly still during setup after setup, so the reflective surface would photograph correctly. And then they asked him to do it again. Chuck Wagner was a trained musical theater performer, and even he later admitted, nothing in musical theater prepared him for that suit. Nothing. Number 5. The show had a secret weapon that absolutely nobody talked about enough, and that secret weapon was a tiny floating light called Cursor. Cursor was Automan's digital companion, a small hovering orb of light that zipped through the air and could construct anything Automan needed. Cars, helicopters, airplanes, you name it, by drawing them into existence with a trail of glowing lines. On paper, this sounds like a throwaway special effect. On screen, Cursor was magic. Audiences adored it. Children in particular were obsessed. The show received more mail about Cursor than about either of the two human leads, which is either adorable or deeply humbling, depending on how you feel about being upstaged by a ball of light. The effects crew responsible for Cursor worked painstakingly on every sequence, rotoscoping the flight paths frame by frame, adding the light trails by hand, making sure Cursor felt playful and alive rather than mechanical. The showrunners noticed the audience response and started writing Cursor into scenes more deliberately. There were conversations, serious conversations, about giving Cursor more screen time, more personality, even a speaking voice. At one point, someone in a production meeting actually suggested a Cursor spin-off. That meeting ended without a decision, which in Hollywood means it almost happened. Number 6. The vehicle sequences were the crown jewels of the entire production, and they nearly bankrupted it. Automan's car, the Autocar, was not an ordinary vehicle. When Cursor drew it into existence, it appeared as a sleek, angular wedge of glowing blue light that looked like something a geometry professor would dream about after too much coffee. But the real magic was what the car could do on the road. The Autocar could make perfect 90-degree turns at full speed. No curve, no drift, just a hard right angle like the laws of physics had simply been asked to wait outside for a moment. Achieving this on camera required a combination of real precision driving on the closed roads, creative editing, and camera placement tricks that made slower turns look instantaneous. The driving sequences were among the most complex and expensive elements of the show to produce. Stunt coordinators spent entire days choreographing single turns. The production had to close streets, coordinate with city permits, manage safety crews, and then do it all over again because the shot needed to be from a different angle. One producer on the show later recalled that some of the driving sequences cost more per minute of screen time than anything else in the budget. The car always made the turn. The budget did not always survive. Number 7. ABC put Automan on the air, December 15th, 1983, on Thursday nights. This seems like a fine, unremarkable scheduling decision until you look at what else was on Thursday nights that season. The A-Team was on Thursday nights. Magnum P.I. was on Thursday nights. Two of the most popular action shows on American television, both with massive established audiences, both on competing networks, both pulling enormous ratings. Automan was a brand new show, expensive to produce, visually unlike anything else on television, with an audience that needed time to find it and fall in love with it. It needed room to breathe. Instead, it got a schedule that would have buried almost anything. The ratings were not catastrophic, but they were not strong enough to justify the production costs. The network watched the numbers each week with the quiet resignation of someone who has already made the decision but is waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. The show never had a real chance to build momentum before the schedule crushed it. In a different time slot, on a different night, against different competition, Automan might have run for years. Instead, it got 13 episodes and a cancellation notice. Thursday nights took the show that never got to become what it could have been. Number 8. The budget for Automan was, by 1983 television standards, genuinely alarming. Estimates placed individual episode costs at close to $1 million per episode, which in 1983 money was an extraordinary commitment for a network television series. The special effects alone, the cursor sequences, the autocar glow effects, the optical enhancement of Chuck Wagner's suit, consumed a significant portion of each episode's production budget. The effects work could not be rushed. The post-production process for each hour of television required more time and more hands than a typical drama of the period. Glenn Larson had sold ABC on the concept with the confidence of a man who had delivered expensive television before, and Larson delivered. The show looked stunning. Even today, watching those episodes, the visual ambition is genuinely impressive for a weekly network production from that era. The glow effects hold up better than most CG work from the same decade. But looking good and surviving on television are two entirely different challenges. Every episode that aired was an argument between what the show cost to make and what the ratings said it was worth. The ratings lost that argument 13 times, and then the show was done. $1 million an episode, and the network pulled the plug before the first season ended. Expensive doesn't mean invincible, it just means the fall hurts more. Number 9. Robert Lansing played Lieutenant Jack Curtis, Walter's boss at the LAPD. And Lansing brought something to the show that nobody had specifically written into the script, and genuine gravitas. Lansing was a veteran television actor with a career stretching back to the early 1960s. He had played soldiers, commanders, authority figures of all varieties across decades of American television. He knew exactly how to make a line land, how to fill a scene with presence without overshadowing the people around him, and how to deliver exposition. And Automan had a lot of exposition, without making it feel like reading from a manual. On a show built around two leads, one of whom was a hologram in a reflective suit, Lansing was the human anchor. He was the voice of institutional skepticism, the guy who didn't entirely understand what was happening, but showed up anyway because the results were hard to argue with. Cast members later described Lansing as the consummate professional on set. He never improvised without permission. He hit his marks. He knew his lines. He treated every take seriously. In a production that was frequently improvising around technical complications, having someone like Lansing in the room, steady and prepared, was worth more than the writer's room ever fully calculated. He was the quiet spine of the whole enterprise. Number 10. Here is where I have to stop and just say, the fact that this show exists at all is kind of a miracle. Think about what Automan was asking an audience to accept in 1983. A police department computer programmer, not a hero, not a detective, not even particularly brave, writes code alone at night and accidentally creates a living holographic human being with superhuman strength, perfect intelligence, and a wardrobe that would make Tron jealous. This holographic human can only operate at full power at night, because daytime electrical demand in the city leaves insufficient power for him to maintain full physical presence. Which means, and I want you to really sit with this, the fate of Los Angeles depended on how many people were running their air conditioners. I am not making that up. The show's central limitation was the power grid. Automan faded when the city was awake and went full power after midnight when demand dropped. It is the most 1983 energy crisis anxiety turned into science fiction. Storytelling you will ever encounter in your life. And audiences accepted it completely because in 1983, that actually sounded plausible. We were 3 years out from a real national energy crisis. Of course, the superhero runs on surplus electricity. Of course he does. That is just good science. Number 11. The show had a writing problem that nobody could solve cleanly, and the problem was simply this. How do you create dramatic tension when your hero is essentially perfect? Automan couldn't be hurt. He couldn't be surprised. He processed information at computer speed, anticipated threats before they materialized, and could physically overpower any villain the writers put in his path. Walter was the vulnerable one, the human who could be threatened, kidnapped, or placed in genuine danger. And the show leaned heavily on that dynamic to generate stakes. But leaning on it every single week meant Walter spent a significant amount of time being the imperiled party. And Desi Arnaz Jr. was too charming to play helpless without it feeling uncomfortable for everyone involved. The writing staff tried different solutions across the run. They introduced episodic constraints on Automan's abilities. They built scenarios where his holographic nature became a liability rather than an asset. They wrote episodes where perfect computer logic was the entirely wrong tool for a human emotional problem. And that approach, when it landed, produced the show's most genuinely affecting moments. A machine mind encountering something it cannot calculate is compelling television. But the fundamental structural tension between an invulnerable hero and a story format that requires danger never fully resolved, and Automan ran out of episodes before the writers found the answer they were searching for. Number 12. The disco era was technically over by 1983, but someone had clearly not informed the Automan design department. The visual language of the show, Automan's suit, the auto car, Cursor's flight trails, owed a deep and obvious debt to late 70s club aesthetics filtered through early computer graphics and neon fever dreams. The angular geometry, the electric blues and whites, the total obsession with reflective surfaces and light-catching material at every opportunity, all of it fully committed and unapologetic. Production choices gave the show a visual identity that was immediately recognizable and, to certain critics of the period, immediately dismissible. Too flashy, too much like a music video had collided with a detective procedural. But here's the thing about aesthetic choices that feel aggressively of their moment. Given enough time, they become archaeology. Decades later, the visual design of Automan is one of its most powerful qualities. The show looks like 1983 distilled and crystallized into moving images. Exactly what people in that era believed the future would feel like, captured in real time, before the actual future arrived and turned out to be considerably grayer and more filled with spreadsheets. Every glowing edge, every light trail Cursor left behind is a photograph of a specific cultural dream. They weren't just making a television show, they were making a time capsule, and they didn't know it yet. Number 13. The show engaged quietly with something that most 1983 network television was genuinely not equipped to handle. The question of what Automan actually was at a philosophical level. Not the mechanics of his creation, which the show was perfectly happy to wave away with cheerful technobabble, but the deeper question underneath. Was he alive? Did he experience anything? Could he feel loneliness, curiosity, or something that functioned like joy? The writers never committed to a full answer, but they kept circling the territory through small, scattered moments across the 13 episodes. Automan observing human behavior with an expression that looked very much like genuine wonder. Automan attempting humor and landing somewhere adjacent to it, but not quite there. Automan making a choice Walter hadn't programmed, and neither of them being able to fully explain why. These were the quiet, emotional core of the series, and Chuck Wagner played them with a careful stillness that made them land with more weight than anyone expected from a Friday night action show. The question of machine consciousness, philosophical territory that remains genuinely complex today, was being actively explored inside a 1983 cop show featuring a glowing suit and a floating light. Years before anyone was seriously discussing artificial intelligence as a cultural force, Automan was already asking the right questions, and asking them with complete sincerity. And number 14. Glenn Larson's production company maintained significant creative control over Automan, which meant Larson's particular sensibilities shaped everything, including the music. The score was built around synthesizer textures designed to feel simultaneously futuristic and propulsive. An electronic pulse that planted you firmly in early 80s genre television from the first note. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Several musical cues across Automan's run bore a striking resemblance to themes from Knight Rider, which had launched the previous year under the exact same production banner. Larson's music department shared resources, personnel, and library material across multiple productions simultaneously, and when post-production deadlines tightened, which they did constantly on a show as technically demanding as Automan, the temptation to reach for an existing cue from the Larson library rather than commission something entirely new was not always resisted. Crew members who moved between productions during this period recalled moments where temporary music dropped into an Automan cut from the Knight Rider library simply stayed in the final mix because changing it would have required time and budget the schedule couldn't spare. Nobody filed formal complaints. Audiences weren't dissecting scores on a note-by-note level in 1983. But if you sit down and watch both shows back to back and certain moments feel musically familiar, you are not imagining it, and now you know exactly why. Number 15. ABC canceled Automan in April of 1984 after 13 episodes, and the announcement was not dramatic. There was no public campaign, no passionate press appearances arguing for renewal, no last-minute viewer petition. Larson was deep in other productions. The network had made its calculation. The show cost too much for the ratings it delivered. The scheduling had never given it a fighting chance. And television moved on with the indifference that only large institutions truly master. But the cancellation that was supposed to be final turned out to be remarkably permeable. Automan found genuine second-life traction in international syndication, particularly across European markets, where American action series with strong visual spectacle performed very well through the mid-80s. In the United Kingdom especially, the show developed a real and loyal following. Audiences who had no idea the series had been canceled in its home country simply watched it run week after week as a current ongoing program until the episodes ran out. The cancellation that felt like a slamming door in America was, for viewers on the other side of the Atlantic, completely inaudible. They were watching a show that had already ended without knowing the ending had already happened. It is one of the stranger small footnotes in the international afterlife of American television, and honestly, kind of beautiful. Number 16. There is a quietly remarkable technological footnote buried inside Automan's storytelling that becomes more interesting the further from 1983 you travel. Throughout multiple episodes, Automan interfaces with computer networks in ways presented as pure speculative fiction, pulling information from remote databases instantaneously, accessing records across connected systems, processing vast volumes of data in seconds to locate suspects and solve crimes. In 1983, this was fantasy. Home computing was a novelty. The internet as a public utility did not exist in any meaningful form. The concept of a program reaching through a connected network to retrieve any piece of information in the world was firmly imaginative territory. Fast forward 15 years, and everything Automan was doing on screen had become unremarkable daily reality. The show describing an impossible future was actually describing a Tuesday in 1998. This has happened with other science fiction, Star Trek communicators and mobile phones, various fictional AI assistants, and Alexa. But there is something particularly precise about Automan's vision of networked intelligence. The writers were imagining technology they had no practical framework to build or fully conceptualize, and the world quietly went ahead and built it anyway, then made it available for a monthly subscription fee with a free router included. Walter Nibici would have been insufferably smug about being right, and he would have deserved it completely. Number 17. Chuck Wagner. After the Automan suit was retired and the production wrapped for the last time, returned to the world where he had built his foundation, musical theater, and constructed a stage career that ran for decades. Touring productions of major Broadway properties, regional theater runs, live performances for audiences who didn't require UV lighting rigs to appreciate what he was doing. By most accounts, Wagner found considerably more creative satisfaction performing on stage than he had standing motionless on a television set, while a lighting crew debated reflectivity for 40 minutes between takes. But the suit had a gravitational pull that never entirely released him. Convention culture, which grew from niche hobby into substantial industry through the 90s and beyond, kept Automan alive as a cult property, and Wagner became a regular presence at science fiction gatherings, where adults who had been children in 1983 stood in line to meet the man who had glowed on their television screens during formative years. Wagner has spoken warmly about these encounters in interviews. He understood Automan was the extraordinary element entering Walter's ordinary world, and that inversion gave the show warmth it might otherwise have lacked entirely. The casting of Desi Arnaz Jr. made it work. Arnaz had a natural quality of audience identification. Warm, slightly awkward, earnest without being cloying. And the writers built toward his strengths. The result was a show where the human character was genuinely and consistently more interesting than the superhuman one. Most superhero narratives fail this test completely. The power overwhelms the person. The flashy ability crowds out the inner life. But Automan kept pulling the camera back to Walter, to the late nights, the unremarkable office, the small victories that nobody upstairs ever noticed. The hero had a glowing suit and moves that defied physics. The heart of the show wore a cardigan and drank bad police precinct coffee, and the cardigan won. Number 19. The show's pilot episode was, by 1983 network television standards, genuinely impressive as a crafted piece of entertainment. It moved with purpose, introduced the characters with efficiency and warmth, delivered the visual spectacle the concept had promised in every pitch meeting, and left audiences with sufficient curiosity to want more. Critical reception was cautiously warm. Premiere numbers were strong enough to justify real optimism in the production offices. And then the machinery of weekly television took over, and the gap between what the pilot had promised and what a weekly schedule could sustainably deliver began to show in ways that accumulated quietly over time. Effects work that had required weeks in the pilot needed to be produced in days for episodic production. Quality compromises accumulated across the season in ways that individual viewers might not have articulated, but registered somewhere below conscious awareness. The glow was still there. The concept still worked. But something about the finish had changed. This is the fundamental tragedy of ambitious television. The pilot makes a promise at a level of quality that the ongoing production infrastructure cannot fully maintain week after week without either the quality or the budget eventually giving way. Automan's pilot was a beautiful, expensive, heartfelt check written against an account that was never quite large enough to cover everything it had promised. The show spent the rest of its run trying to make up the difference. Number 20. In the 4 decades since ABC quietly closed the book on Automan, the show has built exactly the kind of retrospective reputation it never had time to earn while it was actually airing. Online communities devoted to 80s genre television have adopted it as a genuine touchstone. Uploaded episodes on video platforms have accumulated substantial view counts from viewers who weren't born in 1983. The visual aesthetic that once led critics to dismiss the series as temporally limited has been recontextualized by the synthwave revival and the broader cultural appetite for 80s nostalgia. And suddenly, Automan looks less like a relic and more like a show that was speaking a visual language the culture needed 40 years to catch up to. Video essays, podcast episodes, and fan tributes have done more for Automan's reputation in the last decade than ABC's original promotional campaign ever managed. The show, canceled after 13 episodes for failing to hold Thursday nights in America, is now discussed and celebrated by global audiences who discovered it through the internet, the very networked information technology that Automan himself was designed to embody. A show about the power of connected information survived because of connected information. Walter Neighbauer, the overlooked genius typing alone in the police computer room, would have found that entirely deeply satisfying. Bonus fact: the last thing worth knowing about Automan is possibly the most human moment in the entire production history. In the final week of filming, before any official cancellation announcement had arrived, before the network had made the call that everyone in the building had already privately concluded was coming, the cast and crew went about their work with the attentiveness of people who sense an ending without being told about it directly. The ratings conversations had been happening in production offices for weeks. Everyone understood the shape of what was approaching. Chuck Wagner has recalled, in interviews given years later, that on the final day he wore the suit, he stood on the Automan set for several extra minutes after the director called the last wrap. Not as a performance, not for anyone's benefit, just standing quietly in the costume that had made his professional life genuinely difficult for months. The reflective panels, the UV lighting, the heat, the handlers, the endless repositioning for angles that were never quite right, and taking a moment inside the thing that had defined that particular chapter. Desi Arnaz Jr. was nearby. They didn't make speeches. They didn't hold a ceremony. They just stood in the room where something strange and sincere and genuinely ambitious had been made, and let it be quiet for a little while. Automan glowed on television for 13 weeks. They kept him glowing a little longer than that, right there at the end, before the lights finally went out.